This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources parents, families, and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This podcast is brought to you by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Hello, we are so grateful for you joining us again on Candid Conversations. Mark and I are so grateful to have two individuals that we both have such admiration and respect for. We have Andrew Ardnt and Glenn Packiam, both teaching pastors at New Life Church. Andrew Ardnt is the senior pastor or is it senior pastor or just teaching pastor?
Lead pastor is what we say.
Pastor, yeah, perfect. Lead pastor of New Life East, and Glenn Packiam is the lead pastor of New Life Downtown.
You're associate senior pastor now, right?
Sure, man. Yeah, all the time.
whatever the titles are now.
And especially in this time of COVID and quarantine and just the strangeness that life seems to have taken in the past few weeks, we wanted to have a conversation, and it was just kind of a blessing that we already had this scheduled. But we wanted to talk a little bit about laments and community, which may initially sound like it's going to be a downer of an episode, but I can almost guarantee that it won't be. We'll see.
It won't be.
Get to the end, and if it is, you can reach out to us and let us know.
Well, I'd love for you guys to just kind of share your perspectives on lament, because I use lament pretty frequently with my clients, because I really encourage my clients to embrace their feelings, become old friends with their feelings, engage the good feelings and the hard feelings. And so they always look at me like I'm crazy, and then I pull out kind of this step-by-step of how to lament, and they go home and do it, and they come back and go, that was the greatest experience that they've ever had. So can you share just a little bit of your perspectives of this term that many of our listeners, and I think much of the church, is still unfamiliar with?
Well, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the term lament, because the way it's used maybe conversationally is I'm just, sort of venting, just sort of blowing off steam, just kind of letting my emotions go. And there's some truth to that. There is an honesty, there's a rawness to it. But when you look at it in the Bible, there's a difference between Israel in the Psalms and Israel in the wilderness. For example, we're in this series right now at church where we're talking about Israel in the wilderness, and they flat out complain to God in the wilderness. But in the Psalms, it sounds like they're complaining too. So what's the difference? Well, in the wilderness, Israel attacks God's character. In fact, they come up with accusations based on a false assertion about God's character. They say things like, "You're trying to kill us. We would have been better off dying in Egypt," But in the Psalms, there is an appeal to God. It's not an accusation. It's an appeal to God based on his character and really based on his covenant. So lament becomes a form of praise when it is a restatement or a reinforcing belief about God's character, saying, "God, I know you're good. I know you're faithful. You've done it before. You've made a promise to us. So I'm going to pour out my heart to you because I know who you are, because I know your goodness." So that probably is the first thing to say about lament versus a complaint or venting or whining.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love it. I'm a Johnny come lately, I think, to the party on thinking about lament at all. Like a lot of the folks that we pastor, I grew up in the charismatic Pentecostal tradition, and there just wasn't a lot of space for lament. Jesus is raised from the dead. What are you complaining about? Let's get on with it. But lament is so much a part of the Psalms. Fully 2/3 of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. And I love what Glenn said. It's not, here's the thing to recognize about lament that I think is so powerful, is that lament is not just catharsis. So this is not just us sounding off on the things that we're very disturbed by, but lament has a covenantal shape, which Glenn didn't quite say, but invoked, that this is done in the presence of God, and it's done inside a narrative of who God is and how God is for us. And one of the most powerful things that I learned about lament years ago, this came out of a book. I think the editor of it was Patrick Miller, a Princeton scholar, and it was a compendium of essays on lament. And one of the things that they pointed out in this book on lament was that, and this is so powerful, is that lament has a delimiting function. In other words, we're walking through experiences that are very scrambling, and they're very difficult for us to wrap our minds and our hearts around. And lament gives us language for making sense of that experience. So instead of this experience just kind of being a specter that haunts us and scrambles our minds and our hearts, we get to situate the experience inside the presence of God and inside the story of how God is with us and for us. And that act by itself has a way of bringing peace to our hearts. We create meaning around it. We create a frame of reference for it. So I think, especially in this moment right now, where it feels honestly a bit like an apocalypse, like our world has been turned upside down, one of the most powerful things that we can do in this season is lament well. We're doing it inside the character of God and the story of how God is with us in Jesus Christ.
Well, it's
Mark,
interesting. Oh, good.
I'd love to hear you comment, Mark, on the relational impact of being able to be honest with another person that you're in an intimate relationship with, because I think there's a great parallel here with our own relationship and intimacy with God.
Mm-hmm.
But what are you seeing from marriages or even parents and children, say parents who don't allow children to express negative emotions?
Right. Well, it's interesting because, I've worked with a lot of families, and even recently just working with some teens that are just not doing well in the home structure. I mean, you think about people are coming to see us from a counseling standpoint because something's not quite right. And now they're put with those people, all the time. And so it, creates more issues. But I think, I honestly don't believe that emotions can be fully expressed unless they're being expressed in community.
Yeah.
We talk about this all the time, but that research shows that the brain doesn't reach its fullest potential unless it's in relationship with others. Well, our emotional expression has to be in relationship, because it's a reciprocal framework where I'm expressing my emotion and you're giving me feedback, whether it be you're reacting, poorly, which is not good, and that's why we seek out a third party to look at that. But or you're validating me, you're sitting with me, you're allowing me to feel. And I think the greatest thing we can do for our kids. I mean, my daughter had a meltdown 2 days ago, and for a minute there, I'm like, what's going on? And then I'm like, oh, she's 11. I've been, up and down, left and right, trying to figure out how to, make sense of everything being canceled and this, that, and the other thing. And she's not had a chance to express that. So we just sat, and she cried, and I sat, and she, looked up and said, this sucks. And I said, yeah, it does. I said, and I'm not going to tell you otherwise, but let's sit, so the reciprocal response, I think, is really important. And as I was thinking about that too, I was just thinking, this is a great picture of the 23rd Psalm.
Yes.
Because we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but we need not fear any evil because he is guiding us. And it's just an interesting picture, because I think a lot of times we look at emotions as something that need to be good or easy.
Yep.
Positive. Well, and it's interesting. You see people who are struggling with their ability to bond, or maybe, to use a term from your field, attachment theory kind of stuff, where if there's not that empathy or sense of comfort, it's difficult to have attachment, right?
Right.
But we see how people carry that into their relationship with God. So if they had a parent who said, don't you cry, you better not be weak, and then we see people who are unable to pray or unable to experience intimacy with God because they imagine God's going to shun them if they, like Andrew said, are not positive and full of faith.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, Glenn, that you mentioned intimacy, because I think that like emotions, we have a misconception of what that means. In my marriage, there's a lot of intimacy, and that doesn't mean that my wife just sees the good parts of me and loves me for the good parts. But it means that we have moments when we're sharing the hard, the broken, the devastating, the dark parts of what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, the things in our relationship that are hard. And those, I would argue, are sometimes more intimate than some of those like really happy moments.
Oh, yeah.
It's the moment of being known. And I think when we open ourselves up to each other in the communal lament, but especially just to God in our hearts, to these are the dark, hard feelings that I'm experiencing. I need you to see me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about lament also is that it allows us to claim our whole life as the territory in which God is active and at work, and even responsible in some way. And I think the thing that impresses me as I think about Israel's story with God is that there are so many occasions where the things that are happening to Israel are, God is not directly responsible for them. War, plague, famine, pestilence, flood, all of that. But Israel still takes those things and puts them inside her relationship with God and says, God, what are you doing to me? You think about Job, the classic example in the Old Testament is Job, but we know that there was more going on than what Job could see. God was not directly responsible for Job's suffering. It was the devil that was directly responsible for Job's suffering. And yet, when Job starts raising his fist at God, God doesn't push him away. God welcomes it. And in fact, God never directs Job's attention to the behind the curtain stuff. He just receives all of it and leads Job into a deeper revelation of who he is, a deeper experience of God. So that to me is just the power of lament, that we're no longer just addressing nameless forces out there. We're not directing our angst at a virus or at an economy. Those are impersonal things. That we're directing our angst and we're directing our fear at the God who from before the foundation of the earth called us and loved us and names us. And that, as you all have pointed out, that enhances our intimacy with God and it deepens our experience of God. That's the power of lament.
It's so good, Andrew. I love the end of the book of Job is always stunning to me because you're right. God doesn't pull the curtain back and say, well, Job, you see.
Yeah.
He doesn't tell you what to do.
There's no rationalizing.
No, or explaining. But Eugene Peterson in the Message paraphrase has Job respond to God at the end of the book by saying, now I have it all firsthand. I was living on crumbs of rumor, crusts of hearsay. Years ago when I wrote Secondhand Jesus, Creating Rumors of God, that was the idea, was this Message paraphrase of Job's response. And what Job, he doesn't get an answer, but what he gets is this access. He gets this access to the sovereign God himself. Yeah. And I think sometimes maybe our other misconception about lament is lament solves things. It doesn't solve.
Oh.
We don't walk away with like, oh, now I understand.
Now I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. But we walk away with access to God. Like Mark, you describing that scene of you holding your daughter, you didn't fix any of the things she was upset about. But what did she get? She got bonding time. She got cuddle time with dad. That's like us and our Heavenly Father.
Yeah. Yes, there's a great line at the end of one of C.S. Lewis's books. Have you guys ever read Till We Have Faces?
Oh,
it's
I love
his retelling of it. Oh my gosh. And he says, I now know, Lord, why you utter no answer. You yourself are the answer. And before you, all the questions fade away. And there's something about that what we hunger for most deeply is not answers to our questions, but access to God. Yes. We want God. And so that's what lament does, is it creates a playing field where we walk deeper.
It's interesting. It comes back to, I've been studying 1 Kings and just seeing Elijah's story, and seeing God in big ways. And then, not 3 or 4 days later, freaking out and wanting to die and going into depression. But the access that God created, and the fact that he took care of his physical needs first before he took care of his emotional and spiritual needs, and then just the tenderness in how God met him on Mount Horeb. It's a great word, a word picture or just a illustration in my mind of God's care for us as we are trying to figure these things out. He doesn't come back and say, I told you so. It doesn't go like, you should have trusted me. Sorry. But it's this, just like you were saying, Glenn, of just that warm embrace of going, okay, yep, I'm here with you, and let's walk through this. Not let's figure this out. Let's walk through this.
I've been really struck. I'm essentially done with my master's right now in counseling, especially with COVID happening. Everything's going to shut down. But
another diplomas now.
You're done.
Yeah, I'm done. Well, one of the things I've been most struck with is I went to a liberal university intentionally because I went to a theological school for my undergrad. And I expected to be bombarded with information that contradicted my faith. And what I actually found was that there is such evidence in the counseling world that the Holy Spirit is our counselor. Yeah. Because everything that I was saying out of the theology was being shown true in research, that it's the safe place, it's being known, it's being able to be vulnerable. And I think it's so beautiful that in the laments, like when a client comes into my office and is lamenting, is giving me the hard, the difficult, the things that are wrong, the pleading of their heart to have things change. We take on, as counselors, take on a role of Christ, of just holding that space for them, allowing a place of safety for them to express that, and then offering some comfort of our presence and our understanding and our seeing of that. And I think it's so powerful that when we do that with God, we have evidence throughout Scripture that God is not unaware of our
That's right.
Yeah.
struggle, that
Yeah.
we're not coming to him with something that's surprising. I think the hard part for us in our lamenting to God and us when we come into a counseling office and share these hard things is we have to be vulnerable and strong enough to say it to ourselves. We have to be able to
Right.
utter it ourselves and
Yeah.
say, this is what's going on. This is how much it hurts. And that's so difficult.
Well, that's the beauty of counseling too, because a lot of times people don't see that right away, and so we lift up that mirror
Mm.
of reciprocal reflection and say, okay, are you, do you see this? Not in a
Yeah.
judgment sort of way, but in a let's break through some of these barriers and walls, and let's get through those kinds of things.
Guys, talk to us about how community can be that safe space for each other. Because, well, we could say some things about what we learned from how God responds to us and how God hears our prayer and is attentive to our cry. But we've been talking about the book of Job. It's very obvious there are other characters in the book of Job who are the very opposite of a good counselor.
Yeah.
And so as we are trying to support one another, Mark, I think we've talked about Larry Crabb's hyperbolic phrase that if we would learn how to be good community to one another, perhaps we'd need fewer counselors. I don't believe that's true. I'm grateful for your profession, but teach us from your profession. How do we be there for one another?
I think it's coming without an agenda. I think a lot of times and I've been really focusing in on this from an individualistic society such as the United States, that a lot of times we're in it for ourselves. We're in it because we want to get something out of it. We're in it because we want to pat ourselves. I don't know. I mean, there's some of these, ulterior motives, but I think to come in without a desire to fix and without a desire to give advice. I always tell my students this when I'm teaching. Counseling is not about giving advice, and it's not about fixing people. And I get the deer in headlights look going, then what do we do? What am I paying this money for 2.5 years? And it's because you're getting trained on how to be with people.
Yeah.
You're getting trained on how to be a reflective space, a place to hold. I tell my students all the time, and I tell my staff all the time, we are so blessed to walk into somebody's story and hold that space for them and be something that somebody's maybe never been before. You hear this a lot, that your clients will be want to become your friends, and that's the way it should be. Obviously we can't, because of all the things we go through with them, but we want to create that space that maybe they've never been able to create before. And so I think for the church, I think the biggest thing is just to how do you enter in without an agenda. And I love the picture of the Jewish sitting Shiva, when somebody passes away.
Yes.
Just coming and bringing food, bringing a meal, breaking bread, and allowing people to tell story and to cry and to laugh and to celebrate and to engage. And I think that's what the church can do for those struggling with mental illness. Is don't come with a set of, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you gone to this person? Have you checked this out? They've thought through everything to the nth degree because this is their personal struggle. And so if you can create that space of just honest engagement and reflection without judgment, man alive, I think we could see a lot of things change.
Mark, we're now 4 or so weeks into the quarantine, and so people have had a lot of time under their roof together, and there's sort of that there's the possibility that things are going to get, and if they're not already, they're going to be emotionally charged in homes.
Right.
So I want you to talk to us as a mental health professional here on what we can start doing in our homes to make sure that we're staying mentally and emotionally healthy through this season, however long it lasts. What are some practices and habits?
I think we need to create, one of the biggest things that we do at our house is we create sacred space. And so what I mean by that is that we have a space that any of us can go at any time if we're struggling. And so we call it, for the girls, we call it, the calm corner, where we've, put up, this is the life of a counselor's kid. So, but we put up, emotion charts and feeling charts, and we have a bean bag, and we've got, light bright and Legos and coloring and anything that they need to just kind of allow themselves to feel and be. But then, we have that space for myself and my wife too, of going, okay, I'm just, and not being uh, afraid or ashamed to ask for time to just,
Mhm.
because I think, when we're on top, I joke, I get up, I actually have to get dressed, because if I don't and stay in my PJs all day, it's going to be, that's a tough thing. So it's, following the same routine. Then I go downstairs to my office and I work out of my office all day. Well, I need a space that I can go that's not work and that's not family, that allows myself to emote and to feel. So Sarah and I have started a couples journal. And so I will, if I go sit down, I'll just start writing in there how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, whether it be crying out to God or just complaining or sharing some God moment that happened today. And then I'll leave it in that space, and then she'll come whenever she's ready, and she'll read it and she'll respond, and then she'll write her thing. And it opens up some of that vulnerability and communication. But then
It's your own little book of Psalms that you're writing. I
it
like
is,
that. I
yeah,
like that. All
yeah.
right.
Yeah, and so for us, it's that creating that intentional space to be, either be okay or not be okay,
Mhm.
and but then also just creating some semblance of normalcy and routine, and so we try our best to eat dinner at 6 o'clock every night, and then we will, if it's nice out, we'll go for a walk up to the mailbox with the dog, and we'll get the mail, and we'll sit by the lake, and then get up in the morning, and if, have breakfast. Usually I'm the one that cooks breakfast. So I'll have breakfast ready, and I'll go upstairs and get everybody up, and we'll sit around the table and talk. And then we have a game night like we usually do on Fridays, and keep that, and so, as best we can, keep those rhythms the
Yeah.
same. Obviously it's
Yeah.
not the same, but then creating space, like I did with my daughter the other night, just creating space for our kids to process these adult emotions. We can't expect them to handle them the same way we're handling them. So to express themselves, and it might come out in tone or in anger or in hitting their sister or their brother or something that's, and so paying attention to that, going, okay, I'm not going to get on them for hitting their sister. We're going to talk about what's really going on,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and not expecting them to be a 30 something year old or 40 something year old and have everything together.
Very good.
What about Mark? How old are remind me how old your kids are?
Yeah, Hannah's almost 12, and then Elizabeth is 6.5.
Okay, so on the cusp of teenagerhood, I really sympathize with parents of teenagers here. The needs of teenagers are so profound, and
Oh, yeah.
socialization is important for all of us, but it's exceptionally important during 13 to 18, all of the brain development
Oh, yeah.
takes place. Can you give some guidelines for how maybe parents should be thinking about their teenage kids during this season, what they can do to help them through it?
Well, it's interesting. Their social world has been upended, right? And
Yeah.
so uh, I still, to this day, even if we weren't in this state, would not suggest parents using a phone as a form of punishment. Taking away the phone is, I think, in my mind, the dumbest thing you can do. You need to have limits. You need to be engaging them on their apps and what they're doing and that kind of stuff. Teaching them to be responsible, but that's their point of connection, right? There
Mhm.
are new apps coming out every week that I have no idea, what's going on. But be engaged in having them teach you those kinds of things. But their connection is to their friends and to outside the home, because that's what we want. We want them, as they turn 13, 14, 15, going up to 18, to kind of begin to pull away a little bit from the family, to become independent and to engage. And so how do you foster that, whether that be creating some Zoom meetups for them to meet with their friends. But Glenn, I loved your post a couple weeks ago about your daughter's friends showing up for her birthday and
Cool.
just doing a drive-by with signs and balloons.
Yep.
And one of our dear friends did that for my wife last week, and stopped by, and doorbell ditched us, and then stayed in the park, in
Yep.
the car on the driveway for almost an hour, and we just talked from the porch. So getting creative in that way, I
Yep.
think, is huge. But I also think because your kid wants to be by themselves doesn't mean that they are doing something they're not supposed to. They need that space,
Right.
and so whether it be video game time, whether it be reading time, whether it be, obviously, keep boundaries, help them think through responsibility and that kind of stuff. But don't micromanage, man.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
kind
and maybe just enter in with your kids and ask them what they need.
Yeah.
Let them shape the experience.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing with teenagers. We've got two in our house now, and they are little people. They're like little adults, and so there is a sense of and I shouldn't say little. That sounds disparaging. I just mean they're not quite adults, but they're really approximating adulthood, you know.
Right.
And so allowing them a sense of agency. I think parents have a hard time making the switch mentally from saying, no, I need to shape and I need to dictate, and to say, no, wait a minute. This is a planned. I've heard a therapist use the phrase planned emancipation. You know, you're preparing to give them a complete autonomy. And there's a book out there, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, and it's he parallels the thing with the British kind of preparing India for independence, and Churchill was reluctant because of how they're ready to self-govern and all this stuff. But in a very real way, if you don't prepare teenagers for self-governance, if you will, right, it's going to go to total anarchy. So this is that stage in life where you say, well, what agency can I give to you? What choices do you want to make with your friends, with your time, with the structure of your day? The other night, I walked in to say goodnight to one of the kids. It was pretty late and they were up doing homework. And I said, are you sure you want to do this right now? And they're like, yeah, Dad, I just want to get this done so that I can have, extra time tomorrow. And I could have micromanaged that. So you turn up your light and go to bed, but I thought I do that stuff all the time.
Totally.
Like if I want to read a little extra so that I have a lighter load the next. So why not let them make those choices?
Well, and it seems like this would be a good opportunity also to teach your kids about adversity. I mean, this will not be the first time that they walk through a thing that's disorienting and scrambling. So trying to equip them with the tools to not just execute the plan, but to think their way through, to discern the moment.
Yep.
It seems like this is an opportunity to do that.
And I think a lot of times too, like I said, we expect our kids to formulate opinions and tell us what's going on, and they should know and all that kind of stuff. So it's an opportunity, and I've for repeating myself, but doing a journal with your kid too.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of us, we want, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. Something's going on. What's wrong with you? Like, tell me. And you're like, they know that they're feeling off, but they don't know why. They don't know what's going on. Yep. And so giving them a space that they can write. We do that with my oldest right now, and she puts it on my pillow before bed, and she's asleep, and then we're, Sarah and I are reading through it and then responding to her in the morning. Gives her a chance to emote. And so I think especially with teenagers, where they're already emotionally freaking out just because they're teenagers, and then add COVID to this and everything else.
Crazy.
Creating that space.
Well, and there's a very real concept of not being able to, and since it's a very real concept, we have a big fancy name for it called alexithymia. And alexithymia is just not being able to put words to your condition. And I think teens chronically suffer from this. I think all of us do.
I feel like I suffer from that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Now we've got you a term there.
Yeah, and it's just not being like, it's that I don't know what I'm feeling. And the only solution to alexithymia is to find words for it. And so find it a feelings wheel. If you're looking for one, just email us, candid@mayfieldcounseling.com. We've got one. Like, you just find words and then say, this one seems to like it fits. And then you're starting to break through that alexithymia. And I think we need to have more compassion for each other right now, because I think whether or not we were very emotionally regulated beforehand, we're all emotionally dysregulated.
Absolutely.
And so having words, having people compassionate about like, this is hard to figure out what we're feeling right now. I'm going to give you some extra grace.
Well, I love that, Trevor, and I love the big word. Mark, I love the journal idea. Something we've also found helpful at dinner time is, instead of the how was your day or what are you feeling question, because you're right, I struggle with that question too, Andrew. I've found a very simple, almost overly simplistic kind of one of the tools from the Scazzaro emotionally healthy spirituality stuff. What are you sad about? What are you mad about? What are you afraid about? What are you glad about? So, and we just kind of go around the table, and not everyone has to answer everything. We're not going to assume that you're mad about something every day, though you might be, or that you're glad about something every day. So even that for younger kids can just put create a few handles. And I think the goal here, Andrew, you said this about referring to kind of teaching kids, this is not the first crisis, the last crisis they're going to go through. For all of us, this is also about a kind of resilience through the storm. Yes. And Mark, I've heard you talk about that as well. So maybe to tie up some of the threads here, lament doesn't end in lament. I mean, most of the time in the Psalms, even though 2/3 of the Psalms are lament, with very few exceptions, most laments end with a vow to praise, with a commitment to praise.
Mhm.
And it's the psalmist saying, even if they can't sing exactly in this moment, they are anticipating the moment where they will sing again. And that is a kind of resilience of faith, because lament refuses to wallow. Lament is not self-pity. And when lament is exercised, is directed to God and expressed in community, it creates this kind of hopeful anticipation of a future of praise, a future where we can sing to God with the congregation once again.
Well, I think one thing I appreciate that, and I think that's a great way of looking at it, especially for families and individuals that are walking with through this together. I will say though that I want to make a point too before as we close up a little bit, is that it's okay if you do all these things with your family and you process this with your spouse and you're allowing your kids an opportunity to lament. But if it goes, if you feel like it's going farther than that, in the sense that there is something really going on that's um, that could be a safety issue, that's where you draw in a pastor, you draw in a mental health professional. There's a lot of us in this town that are doing teletherapy, but I think it, as a parent, when we raise the flag and say I need help, it makes us feel like we're less than, and I think that's totally off. I think we need to realize that sometimes our kids need support beyond what we can provide. And so reaching out to a mental health professional. I'll do a shameless plug too. I've got a free ebook out now on teens that are self-injuring and suicidal through Focus on the Family. And so it's a 86-page free download. If you need kind of a step-by-step guide on how to walk with your kids that are really going beyond, that are struggling more than you've realized. But that's what I love about what you guys are doing at New Life. I really love what other churches are doing in the community. They are providing that space and that connective resource to others outside of that. So I really appreciate the both of you and your ministry. I appreciate you guys taking the time today, to do this. I know you're probably working. I don't know about you guys, but Trevor and I found that if we don't put boundaries around some stuff, we ended up working like 12-hour days, because we're like, oh, yeah, I'm at home, I can just keep on doing. So, thank you guys for what you do in our community. Thank you for the truth that you continue to speak. Thank you for your compassion and just interest and desire to want to help individuals with mental health as well.
Well, thanks for your expertise today, and thank you for your service to our community. It's just an invaluable gift that you offer us.
Amen.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are so glad that you are here today, and we hope that if something came up for you that piqued your interest or that you have more questions about, you feel the freedom to call Mayfield Counseling Centers. We're not just here for people in Colorado Springs. We want to help everybody we can. So if you have any questions, email us at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com, or you can check out our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page, where we post resources on a pretty consistent basis. We'd love to help you in whatever we can. Feel free to reach out.